Well, good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming. Great to see you. So we are in John's Gospel, and if you've been with us the last 3 weeks, you'll know we've got as far as chapter 2. So we're doing well, aren't we? Perhaps I over-egged what I could get through in a 4-week course. So we might not get much further than the first half of John's Gospel, which means we can save this for Christmas or whenever, can't we? It's like we'll do the other half later. So just to kind of recap, we're following Gary Burge's map on the back of your handout, which just gives us a little map of the Gospel of John, essentially splitting it into 2 halves: Book of Signs and the Book of Glory. We are well and truly into the Book of Signs. And what we see in the Gospel of John is John using all these different things that Jesus does minimally. So he doesn't give us loads and loads and loads of miracles. He gives us a select number of signs because he wants to point us to who Jesus is. He's already told us who Jesus is in the prologue, hasn't he? The incarnate Word of God, and then each of the signs is kind of arcing back to that. What does this thing Jesus says, or what does this thing Jesus does tell us about who he is? And it's sort of kind of a cyclical thing throughout the Gospel. Last week we looked at water into wine and how those empty stone jars were a sign of the ritual washing of the Jews, which was empty, and Jesus fills them and then turns that into wine, which is an invitation to the Messianic banquet. It took us 20 minutes last week, but that is the line basically. It's amazing. It's an amazing miracle of provision, and those of us who preach that, there's nothing wrong with that. But the kind of the deeper side is this is something going on in Judaism, and Jesus is. I don't like the word replacing because that sounds like he's getting rid of, but he's fulfilling, if you like, the signs and the festivals which we'll get onto this morning. So let's have a think about Jesus clearing the temple. So in John's Gospel, it starts quite early on in his ministry. In John chapter 2, Jesus has been to Canaan, he's been to this family wedding, and then he doesn't tell us exactly how long, but within it would appear days, he is cleansing the temple. Now in the other Gospels, the cleansing the temple is at the end of his ministry. Holy Week, Jesus cleanses the temple. Is there two cleansings, or is there one and John's doing something different with it? What do you think?
I think you probably need to do it twice, to be honest with you.
At least twice, Kathy, right? I mean, you could walk around the churches of Britain and around the world doing a bit of cleansing, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So you go for 2?
At least.
Yeah, at least 2. 2? 1? 2? 1? One is going for 1. Yeah, that's what I like. That's what I like. You see, Kat's got multiple. So my money would be on 1 because of how John shapes his gospel. He's not giving us a chronological life story of Jesus. In fact, we'll see in a moment that we skip a whole year of stuff. Chapter 2 is around the Passover, and then chapter 3 and 4 are around the Passover, and it's not the same Passover. So, and we've already read on with it, Jesus did lots of other signs that were attracting the Jews to Jesus, but John doesn't tell us about them, because he's not interested in us, seeing everything that Jesus did. He wants to show us something about Jesus. And so he's gone from the stone jars, which were ritual washing, to the temple. The 2 things are linked, aren't they? Because you needed to wash yourself to come to worship. And then Jesus comes to worship and says, look what you've done to this place. So it's actually, the water and the wine is a bit ambiguous. It's like, that was interesting, but we had to dig into it. This is much more plain. What are you doing? You're stopping people coming to Yahweh with all of this stuff you put in the place. So I think there's 1 cleansing, but there might be 2, and don't worry if you think there's 2, great, and there might be more than 2. Yeah, fantastic. But as we think about the 2 stories together, because remember John's all about his contrasts, think about those 2 stories together, it becomes really powerful. So the question for us is, what does God want to cleanse in our lives? What does he want to chuck out? What do we need to do to get back to him? So it's a fantastic sermon. It was like this really deep kind of ongoing message. In chapter 2, verse 18 is the first time we get mention of the Jews, and that becomes a technical term in John for the enemy. So the problem with that is over the years that has been used for anti-Semitism. So we have to, whenever we read that, you have to remember who's writing it. John, son of Zebedee. And what religion was he? Jewish. And he's writing about Jesus. And what religion was he? Jewish. So from Martin Luther, all sorts of people, they've used that phrase to go, well, the Jews are the enemy. That's not what John is doing. This is a technical term for those who are in opposition to Jesus. So when Nicodemus comes, Nicodemus is not one of the Jews, even though he's a Pharisee and a kind of Israel's teacher. He's seen actually very positively, like John the Baptist is. John, the writer of the gospel, the evangelist. Call him the evangelist. That makes life so simple, isn't it? So the evangelist is saying, you can come to the Messiah wherever you come from. So as he's speaking, as we get the story about Nicodemus, well, who's told the evangelist that story? It's a private conversation. Jesus. So Jesus has shared that story with his disciples. Guess who came to see me last night? Remember? The man of the day in the middle of the night. So there's a contrast. Nobody coming at night, slightly, ashamed maybe, but he's portrayed very positively. Very positively. You can come, whether you're religious or whether you're a woman who comes to the well at midday. We'll get to her in a second. So we've got this. We have the water and the wine, and then we have the Jesus turning over the tables in the temple, and then we have the teacher's teacher. So all these things were around the religion and the process of Judaism. And you listened to your rabbi, you listened to your teacher, you took him on board, and Jesus is revealing more and more of himself in each of these instances. And he's also revealing, John is taking us massively into the Old Testament, and we kind of lose that a little bit, partly because we're separated a bit from the Old Testament, and partly because of the English. But we've had in the prologue, we were straight into Genesis, weren't we? In the beginning, the water into wine was into Leviticus, and the stone jars are clean, but need to be filled with the right sort of water. And Nicodemus brings us into Numbers and into Ezekiel. So Numbers 21, really strange Old Testament story. The people have rebelled. It's a common theme, isn't it, with people? It's called sin. So the people have rebelled. There's these vipers have come into the camp and bitten people, and they're dying. People are dying, and God says to Yahweh says to Moses, fashion this snake on the pole, and the people look to the snake, they will be healed. It's really weird. It's a really weird Old Testament story. When you think about Old Testament religion, like one of the things Yahweh is against is idols. The golden calves and all those things. It's like that's like an ongoing message. Don't do that. Don't do that. Why is that there in Numbers 21? Well, it's for this occurrence here with Jesus. Is this messianic? Is it a messianic prophecy? It's certainly a messianic wait and see what happens with this. And for centuries, the preachers have wrestled with that. Why is that? Why is that there? What do we do with that? Do we all start making snakes? Do we become the West Virginian snake handlers? All that stuff. No, he's going. No, this is me, the one who will be the one who will be attacked by the snake, pierced, lifted up to bring peace and healing. It's an amazing Jesus thing. So we've got Jesus speaking to Nicodemus, who he's essentially saying, you do not understand the scripture. Let me explain the scripture to you. So it's kind of an attack on Judaism. You think your teachers are good, but they're not good. They don't know what they're talking about. All these scriptures talk about me. It's back in the prologue. All these things, I am the Word. All these things talk about me. And then he gets into this discussion with Nicodemus about being born again. Anybody born again?
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of gone out of fashion a little bit, hasn't it? The phrase, perhaps, if we got ridiculed too much. But it's a fantastic bit of scripture, isn't it? You must be born again. And Nicodemus rightly is like, what are you talking about? I'm an old man, how can I be born again? How is this possible? And Jesus says, you must be born of water and the Spirit. What's he talking about? Is this a great preacher's thing for baptism? No one dares answer to that.
I don't think so. I think he's referring to you've got to be born of the Word of God and the Spirit of God. And that's what
Lovely,
I take it.
Lovely.
To me.
Anybody else?
But they do refer to it as baptism and the story about our babies born in water.
Yeah.
And then you that but there's a few theories about it.
Yeah,
that's the way I see it.
Born in a sexual act, water, birth, and then a new spiritual act by Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, for those who love a bit of biblical study, you go, that's a sermon series in itself. How do you get born of the water and of the Spirit? But he might not be talking about baptism, but he's definitely back to cleansing, because we've been talking about cleansing, haven't we? So the water and wine is about cleansing. The temple is about cleansing, and he gets to Nicodemus, and this is about cleansing. How can you be clean before God? You must be born of water and of fire, the Spirit. It's one of those little subplots in John's Gospel. He's in Ezekiel 36. You need to have a new spirit. It's not a new teacher Jesus is bringing. He's explaining the scripture to Israel's teacher. He's saying these are the scriptures that are about me. And then we get to the well. Anybody's favourite story? I mean, it is an absolutely brilliant story. And if you've been watching, anybody seen this one on the Chosen?
Yeah.
It is brilliant, absolutely brilliant story. But for John's first audience, slightly shocking story, slightly amusing story. It starts by telling us that Jesus had to go through Samaria. And those of you who've been around the church a long time, which is everybody in this room, will know that he didn't. He didn't have to go. In fact, Jews did not go that way. Let's avoid that way. Let's not cross the country and go through Samaria. Let's just take a slightly longer road. That means we don't have to go near those unclean, untouchable people. So John's telling us something there, isn't he? It's one of his directions. Jesus has to go. He's got an appointment. So you've got this Jewish rabbi who meets this Samaritan woman. It sounds like sort of a joke, doesn't it? And it is a little bit funny. But we're back in cleansing. So it's a well, and the well is I think the archaeologists have found the well, so we know where Jesus was. But it's a sinkhole. It's a deep well, but it's not living water. And all the way through these stories, we've got this idea that Jesus is living water. And what you need for life is living water. And what you need for redemption is living water. And what you need for you to be whole is living water. So the fourth story in a row that really is about cleansing. And he has this fantastic little back and two about where salvation comes from and the Samaritans and the Jews and all those things. And we could spend hours on that stuff. But the bottom line is it's all about the well and who he meets there. So she's this kind of woman of the night in the middle of the day, like that. Contrast. And Jesus is saying, it doesn't matter who you are, you can be Nicodemus, or you can be the unnamed woman. There is living water here for you. And she says that, I know when the Messiah comes, he will explain this to me. Deuteronomy 18, so the Samaritans have the Torah, rejected most of the rest of the Old Testament, but they have the Torah. So Jesus takes it to where she is. And it's really important for us when we're talking to people, where they ask, where do I take you in my conversation? Because, I need to talk to you where your understanding is. So he's kind of bringing some Jewishness to her, and he's also bringing this challenge to us about cleansing again. The idea of baptism isn't a Christian idea. I think most of you know that it's a very Jewish idea. Most of what we do right as followers of Jesus is very Jewish. But the things we do wrong, added bits are often from Plato and other people, but the Jesus stuff mostly is Jesus interpreting his culture and showing us this is the way to go. So the Qumran community that John the Baptist was probably part of, the Essenes and the slightly wilder esoteric people out in the desert, they had their ritual washing place was a live stream. So they'd put little dams in and stuff so that the water flowed through their community, because you had to be cleansed with living water. In the temple, those 3,000 people who come to faith in Jesus on that first day in Acts, how do they baptise 3,000 of them? Because they hadn't built baptism pools like the Baptist and Brethren churches, had they? No, there was baptism pools in the temple, because people got baptised as part of their ritual cleansing to worship Yahweh. So Jesus is saying, this is what you need, Samaritan woman. You've got some things right, but actually what you need is an encounter with Yahweh. I'll stop there. Any questions? Any things on that? What about that?
I was just wondering, when it says that you're born of water and the Spirit, we have to be human beings, don't we?
Nice,
We
yeah.
have to be born as humans. We can't, there's the angels and so on. They can't be part of it because you have to be. This is important.
Yeah.
That is important.
Yeah. Very good. And I think that probably is also, that's just got me thinking about the John's prologue is one of the things he's saying is Jesus is definitely a physical being. He's born of water. If it's the physical sexual act, like I think almost everything in John, there's like these multi-layers. So I don't want us to fall into a thing like, oh, no, it means this, or it means this, but actually it probably means that and that and that. Brilliant. Any other going, Wally?
One of the things that really stood out to me several years ago was what Jesus says happens when you're born of water and the Spirit. Because I, for years, read, if you're born of water and the Spirit, you get to go to heaven. And that isn't what he says. It says if you're born of water and the Spirit, you can see the kingdom and you can enter the kingdom. And that's very different. So it has to do with seeing the kingdom of God in our midst, as the work of God's Spirit in our life, in our everyday, and entering that and being involved in it, being committed to Christ. The illustration that I used for some time was my father. He was born in Germany, and he came to America between the wars. So he left after the First World War, and he saw what was coming. 41 years old, he immigrated to the States, and he left one kingdom and entered another. And what happened in Germany after he left, of course, they were under Nazism and was in a terrible place. He entered a land where he could get his high school degree and his citizenship and his master's and his PhD, became a university professor, vice president of the university before he passed away. He had a chance to see and enter a different kingdom that changed everything in his life. And that's what Jesus is talking about, that entering of a kingdom.
So we're going to switch a little bit. We're going to go from these institutions to the festivals, and the fact that, but the switch is in John 4. So I've got a little question for you there. How many I ams are there in John? Okay, speak it louder.
7.
So I've got 7. Yeah, it's classic, isn't it? 7 I ams. I am the bread of life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Yeah. That's 2. Come on, because the others. I'm the light. I'm the door. I'm the good shepherd. I'm the vine. I'm the resurrection and the life. I'm the bread of life. So there is 7 of those statements. I'm not saying there isn't. Sorry, no. There is 7 of those statements. But what we've missed is that this I am, ego eimi, which is a direct link with what God says to Moses. I am who I am. It's a direct claim to Godhead, Yahweh. So it's a transliteration of that. appears from chapter 1 in John. John scatters I ams through. And when Jesus is talking to the woman at the well, John 4:26, I've got my right verse down. And Jesus declared, I who speak to you am he. But the Greek says, I am. When the Messiah comes, Jesus just says, I am. So the English is added a bit more, so it makes better English, and I make better English. But that's certainly the second one. There's one in John 1. There's an I am in John 1, like unequivocal. This is who I am. So all the way through the gospel, these things are scattered because he's going to take us back to the prologue. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, all the way through, showing us who Jesus is. So we have this. We have these 4 stories about Jewish things: weddings, messianic banquet, temple, teacher, and the people on the edge, and all of them about cleansing and meeting God, and we get this invitation here from Jesus into the banquet. I missed a page. That's good. So let's go to the banquet. So then we get these festivals in Jesus. Jesus starts to go to these festivals, and in the festivals he starts to reveal more of who he is. And it's this kind of invitational thing to those who read this story to go, oh, I'm invited. I can come with Jesus, and it starts with the Sabbath. So the first festival we'll talk about is the Sabbath, and everyone was expected to keep the Sabbath. And if you've been to Israel in modern times, everyone is expected to keep the Sabbath. We went with a Christian holiday company. Can't remember. Went with a holiday company, and they, for some reason, they arranged our hotel change on the Sabbath. Now, if you've had that, it was a really bad idea, because we leave one hotel, we're all Protestant, Western Christians, some West Indians, some British, and we get to our next hotel and there's no rooms available because it's Sabbath, and none of the Jewish people are leaving till Sabbath is over. So Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, I think it was 10:30, the last people got their rooms. Like, who organised this too? Have you not been to Israel before? It's still in place, if you like. And so we have this in John, this first Sabbath that Jesus deals with is the Sabbath festival. So we have this great story. Jesus is at the pool of Bethesda. You can go and see that. We discovered it in the 1960s. It's an amazing thing, and it's a slightly dodgy place. They have interesting theology. The people in there who are waiting by that pool. Could somebody read for me John chapter 5 verse 4?
It's not there.
Oh.
It's been missed out.
If you haven't got an English Bible in front of you, June might have one with it in.
I've got it in the footnotes.
Oh no, you can't read the footnotes. No, not on the footnotes. Go on, June. Go on. So.
Other ancient authorities had holy orange cards, and then this is verse 4, waiting for the stirring of the water, for an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well from whatever disease that person had.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, you know that the verses and chapters were added in the medieval period, and then in the modern period, Bible translators have gone, that's a later addition into the Gospel. It doesn't appear in the earliest extant copies of John's Gospel. We'll miss it out, but they just mess out the whole verse, because otherwise they mess all of the numbering up in John's Gospel. So I find that sort of thing really interesting. It's like, That's interesting. And as Jude read there, it gives us a little bit of an explanation. The people expected the angel to thingy the water, to hot spring, bubbles come up. The angels will mess with the water. Let's get in there. It is slightly Jewish theology. So Jesus goes to this place where the people are a little bit, they're like the people we live amongst and work amongst. They've got a little bit of Christianity and a little bit of Buddhism and a little bit of horoscopes. Touch wood. I mean, that's a great phrase, isn't it? Touch wood. The only wood you should touch is the cross of Jesus. How he was crucified. Don't say that. I'll just think you're a complete idiot. But all those things. I'm Gemini. What are you? All that nonsense. It's like, well, I'm not saying it is nonsense, but it's not biblical. It's not of God. So Jesus comes in this place, and he heals it, and he heals it on the Sabbath. So people are not allowed to do work on the Sabbath. So does Jesus cause the man to sin? You have to say no, don't you? Because you're a Christian, and why would Jesus do that? Why doesn't he cause the man to sin? He's Lord of the Sabbath.
He's in charge.
But they don't accept him as Lord of the Sabbath. Because the man was not a furniture remover. And so to pick up his mat was not work. Was it? Was it?
He says it is.
Says it is. Yeah. According to the Old Testament, Exodus 20, you're not allowed to do any work. But you are allowed to do things like this. What the Pharisees have done, and the wider Jewish thinkers, have added definitions of work. I think it's 37, but there might be more. What work is. So the Pharisees can go, as Glenn has said, yes, this is work. Poor guy's going, I don't care. I've been lame all my life. This man has sorted me out. And as we've said, Mark chapter 2, Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. So he's not encouraging him to sin. He's telling us something about Sabbath. Sabbath rest is for people. And as we move into the festivals, what we get is this idea that the festivals are not meant to be some restraining thing around your life. They're meant to be life-giving, because they are all about the Messiah, who is the one who brings the living water, who brings the life. Is it 10:30?
1:29.
Well, we'll have a quick dabble into Passover, because Passover is really interesting. So in our first session, you weren't all here, but in our first session, we talked about what John misses out. And one of the things he misses out is Eucharist, is communion. But he doesn't miss it out. It is sown through the entire gospel, the bread and the wine, the body and the blood, the invitation to Jesus. And Jesus goes to a Passover. So this is his second Passover. So we've moved 12 months since the cleansing of the temple in chapter 2. So we've not got a lot of detail about his life, have we, in those 12 months? John's going, you don't know that stuff. Read Luke, read Matthew. Matthew's got all that detail. I haven't read that. This is what I want you to see. I want you to see we've moved from Sabbath to Passover. And Jesus is fulfilling those things. And we can, you've all heard some fantastic sermons on how Jesus fulfills the Passover, how the different cups in the Passover are, who Jesus is, how that final cup that is never drank, the cup of Elijah, Jesus drinks it, how even the little holes in the matzo crackers are the piercings of Jesus. I mean, all that stuff, fantastic. We can unpick all that. We haven't really got time for it. But we do see Jesus being the bread of life here. And the whole story has got bread woven through it, the body of Jesus. So it starts with the feeding of the 5,000, John's Gospel. I think all the Gospels have got that. It's very important to the disciples, because Jesus is doing a Moses thing, because Moses provides bread in the wilderness for the people. So Jesus is doing a Moses thing with the bread. And then the story moves on, and Jesus walks on the water. Fantastic, we won't unpack that today. Jesus walks on the water, gets to the other side, and there's then this discussion where the people who've gathered say, well, what sign will you show us? And where we, the readers, are reading that going, he's just shown you. And that's what, John's really dramatic for us. People are like, we're reading it, don't you get it? Because as you read that, you go, oh, Jesus provided bread in the wilderness. That's what Moses does. Then he goes on to talk about his body and his blood. So there's this Eucharist. Come and taste of me. And we'll start with that next week. Great. Any questions before we stop? Ace, thanks for being with us.